think there's going to be an enormous job displacement in the coming 3 years. Change is the only constant. So it's really about embracing the change and surfing the wave of change. The way I do work today has nothing to do with the work I was doing a year ago.
Do you think today's AI builders think enough about consequences?
To give you an idea of how I work today, because I've not seen many people working like that today, but those who work like that are 10 times more productive. I don't type anymore. I don't have a keyboard anymore.
There are some conversation will be different, and this is one of them, because today's guests operate at the sharp edge of AI, where technology meets judgment, ethics, and real money. He's not just building systems that work, he's building systems that have consequences. My guest today has been coding since the age of 10, served 7 years in the Air Force, studies justice and ethics at the Harvard Law School, and today leads AI technology for a wealth management platform operating at the highest level of financial decision making. He's lived across systems, military, startups, enterprises, and boardrooms, and now stands at the intersection of AI, ethics, and wealth. Vincent, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sachin, thank you very much for having me today.
Before we talk about AI, I want to go back to the beginning. I want to go back to your journey. What kind of kid were you? What did those early years hardwire into you?
I was a difficult kid, actually. I just got my high school certificate. I didn't go to uni. I had my first computer when I was 10, so I've been into coding very, very early. And I was passionate about mathematics and coding, but maybe I was too passionate. My brain was going too quick, so I was bored very quickly. So I was disturbing class all the time, and I ended up being quite a failure in the educational system, actually. That's what led me to join the military a bit later on, because there was no opportunity for me being a dropout of university.
But you started coding at the age of 10, right?
Yeah, so 10, I had my first computer, which was an 8087. This is really the prehistoric, the dinosaurs of computers. I was coding very quickly. I wanted to understand how to make it work. So at the time, you had MS-DOS to launch applications. But I wanted to make my own. So I learned BASIC, and 1 year later, I learned assembly, then Pascal. What else was there at that time? C, and quite a few stuff then a bit later. But I got carried by the logic of it, by how you can describe the world and the logic of the world in just a few instructions and get the computer to actually give an output from the rules you've given. At that time, that was not something that many people knew, and I got right away passionate about it.
Wow, that's awesome. And what did Air Force teach you that startups never could?
Yes, I didn't have much opportunity. I was a very turbulent kid, so I think actually I needed discipline. And I was not exercising at all. So getting in the Air Force is pretty rough when you're not exercising. But during the initial military training, it's mostly sports, basically. And we were a promotion of 141, and I ended up 11th, despite having no sport background. And I think it's really a mindset thing. I finally found a place where I could complain as much as I want. I could be a turbulent kid. Ultimately, this place was working with rules and order. And I think I needed that. I needed this kind of discipline to combine it with my logic. That was working very, very well. And I think there's two things I learned the most. One is that effort is not something natural. Effort is a taste that you acquire. And they were really teaching us to acquire the taste for effort. And I think the second thing that was also very, very important for me is that you learn to go beyond what you think is possible. When they tell you to run 10 kilometers, you're like, oh, that's my limit. And you arrive at 10 kilometers and say, well, change of plan, we run 10 more. And you think you will never make it. But when you make it, it just shows you that it's purely in your mind, that you block yourself. It's a psychological trick, basically. And once you learn that, you learn to develop the taste for effort, the curiosity, and all these things that unlock your full potential, actually.
Wow. You started with code at 10 years old. Then you chose something completely different, the Air Force. That's discipline, structure, and organized hierarchy. Was there a moment when you realized I think differently from most people around me?
I think I always did. It's not necessarily during the Air Force or at school. I was a different kid, right? That's why I was turbulent. I don't know if I can say I was not really social. Maybe I was not, but yeah, I think I was just different. Sometimes when your brain processes things a bit faster than the others, you don't find common grounds. Yeah. So I never saw myself as a follower, as someone who's thinking like the others. I always had a bit of critical thinking, and it's just my DNA, I would say. I was born like that.
Uh, There's one more thing that stood out to me. In 2015, you took a 12-week program on justice, ethics, and moral reasoning at Harvard. That's not a course engineers randomly take, right? Why ethics? Why justice?
So it's a bit random, actually. This course was the very first course available on iTunes University. And I had the very first iPhone very early. I think it was 2010. And iTunes University, I got, let's start watching it. And I loved the professor, Michael Sandel, was someone absolutely extraordinary, charismatic, tolerant, and wise. So I got really interested in it and decided to take the full course. And I think its introduction is showing something that is very important and a guiding principle in my life. That there's a lot of problems, of dilemmas where you don't have a solution. There's not an obvious solution to a problem in some cases, right? And all the philosophy aspect of this course is showcasing this kind of problems without obvious solutions. But he said that once you look at these kind of problems and extract yourself from it and look at the arguments and the counter arguments, even if you don't find a solution, when you go back to this problem maybe a year later, you will not see this problem the same way. And that will change your way of seeing the world. You will start to see these kind of dilemmas everywhere, and you will stop thinking about them very blindly. Basically, it's going to change you, and it did change me, to bring relativity to my way of thinking, to bring a more toned down version of the opinions I form. And I think that's a real takeaway from this course. And by the way, it's available for free on YouTube. I suggest everyone to put 12 hours of your time to go through it, because it's absolutely amazing and life-changing.
I will definitely put it in link in the description. So this part of education what you had and this oversight you had on the justice and ethics, did it help you on the AI side, bringing it to the AI platform?
So interestingly, the very first AI project that I developed was in 2012. That's when the Minister of Justice in France decided to open source the data set of court decisions. So I downloaded the stuff. It was like 2.5 gigabytes, which was huge at that time. Today it means nothing, but it was huge at that time. And at that time, there was no framework, no TensorFlow, no PyTorch, nothing. There was only scikit-learn. So I download scikit and I start to learn clustering around it and stop words. And I start to develop my stop word list. And then after a bit of tinkering, I start to figure out that it classifies a few clusters actually by type of law: family law, criminal law, civil law. Very, very interesting. I was like, hey, I can actually develop something. And we were working at that time with a lot of lawyers. So I developed the first search engine for court data sets in France that was able to categorize court decisions by type of law. A small project, but again, in the justice field. So very, very interesting. And I think, life is an evolution. It's not that something created something. It's that the combination of all the learnings and how you developed with these learnings and the people you meet and the opportunities you have professionally, this is a combination of all that triggers what you're passionate about. And very early, I figured out, I love tinkering with computers. I love programming. I love discovering new things. I love how the human brain is working. That's why I took the Harvard course. So AI was actually the perfect combination of all the fields I'm interested in and the logical next steps of all the things I've also achieved before that. So that's why I progressively get nearly full time into it.
That naturally brings us to this query, which we all ask. Do you think today's AI builders think enough about consequences?
So, of course not. There's an economic incentive to every system, right? And if you work in MNCs, you would see one thing which is quite funny, is that you have different CXOs, right? You have your CIO, your CFO. In most MNCs, they can have KPIs that are counterproductive. The KPI for the CFO and the KPI for the CIO might drive completely different decisions that are not going well together. And I think this is the typical thing that happens in any complex human systems, is that creating alignment towards a common goal is already extremely difficult. So creating alignment towards a goal which is positive for the society, for the progress of the world, is even harder, right? Doing that and getting capital to develop these solutions is, let's be realistic, it's impossible, right? You need money to develop, you need to follow market rules, you also have your own incentive personal at the company level, because people are ambitious and have their own idea of where they want to go. So I think it's not that people don't care, it's that people can't necessarily care the right way. But that doesn't mean that it's bad for the world, right? Because everything ultimately balances out. When you go too much on the wrong side, the right side tend to overcompensate to balance that. So I just think that's how the world is working. That's the market economy as well that is driving that. That's how it is. We need to play by the book.
So finally, the AI will come to a neutrality point where it's good for everyone, is what you're saying.
Well, I'm not necessarily that optimistic about it. I think there's going to be an enormous job displacement in the coming 3 years, let's say. I mean, we already see it daily. I reduced nearly all the teams that we have: IT, marketing, SDR. You can automate so much with it. So that will rebalance the cards in terms of job market and in terms of how economies are functioning. There's a lot of talks about universal basic income, about tax on agents. It's still very early, but we're going to see economic, not disaster, but consequences very, very quickly because of AI. And we're not even talking about robotics yet, and robotics are starting. So there's a lot of things that will change. That's how the world is. Change is the only constant. So it's really about embracing the change and surfing the wave of change. The way I do work today has nothing to do with the work I was doing a year ago. And I love it. Does that mean it's bad for me? No. Does it mean it's bad for society? Maybe. Maybe it's going to enable only, let's say, the top engineers, and you're going to create a kind of AI elitism. Possible. But maybe you will also create some other opportunities. I mean, who am I to predict that? You cannot really predict these kind of things. So pessimistic on one side, but optimistic on the other side, because now the cost of building is close to zero, which means that everyone can be a builder. So the paradigm will be very different. It's not going to be anymore about getting the capital to build. It's going to be about getting the capital to distribute. And that's why I see opportunities more than I see challenges. But again, it's about surfing the wave of change, capturing these changes in the need of the market and working with that. So the typical example that I give in these cases is, I was at the National University of Singapore a few weeks ago, and there was a dean who was talking exactly about that, about what do they think about the future of education. And he was saying something which I think is the most relevant, is that maybe we're forming and teaching people to be specialists in this, that, and that. And maybe actually tomorrow we will not need specialists anymore. Maybe tomorrow the need will be the generalist specialist. So people, I don't know if you know the personality, you have the horizontal, the vertical, the T-shaped, the V-shaped. So think more about the V-shaped. So you have some deep specialty, but you're not only narrow. You know a lot of side things. Today, as a technologist, I can code, let's say, AI agents, orchestration frameworks, and things like that. But I can also build an N8N automation for my sales team. I can build a lot of different things, right? Because I'm not only interested in the tech, but in all the adjacent domains, whatever it's sales, marketing. And that's a reflection of my life, right? I've been in the Air Force, I've been in family office, I've been in telco, now I'm in fintech. I've done a lot of different domains. And at some point you build a mindset which is domain agnostic, where you think in terms of structure and not in terms of domain expertise.
One is that you are direct, blunt about what the future of AI will be. And second thing was you were describing more with examples. So this is where my audience who are students and early career professionals will greatly learn from this talk.
Yeah, so I think talking about that, one thing that I'm doing as well. So I'm a volunteer in a Tech for Good nonprofit called Better SG. We have about 3,000 volunteers there. And last year we built a AI ML mentorship program together with Meta. Meta was the main sponsor for that program. And initially I was thinking how to build a curriculum for this program. And by the time I finished chapter 1, it was already obsolete because things change so fast in the AI domain. So that made me rethink. Maybe it's not about the curriculum. How do I approach the speed at which things evolve? And instead of building a mentorship program, which is about curriculum and hard skills, we built a program which is about exposure. So we actually brought, I think, 52 different mentors coming from all kind of companies, JP Morgan's, AWS, Volute, and others, working in AI. And the only goal of the program is to give you exposure to these people, to meet them, to talk with them, and to attend presentation where they show you, they showcase what they do on a daily basis. Why? Because I think that it's more about showing how people are applying it, how people think about it, how people are approaching the challenges about AI than actually learning how to implement. The tech is the easiest today. Having the right mindset is the hardest. And I think at least we've seen a lot of success in this mentorship program by bringing exposure instead of hard skills.
True. Because this will help a lot of people who are in the AI, in the engineering field to know about AI. And there has been 3,000 volunteers is what you were telling, right?
It's only Singapore.
Life.
It's only Singapore. I would say three main kind of profiles: students, mid-career transitioners, people who are pivoting, and people who just have an interest in knowing more. But generally, if you touch one person, you touch also indirectly other people. And the more you bring awareness, the more you bring exposure about certain mindsets, the more you actually uplift everyone together.
So this thing directly comes to the point where you have built large teams like the NGO where you're organizing large events, right? And big budgets and real P&L responsibility. Many brilliant engineers struggle when they move from building to leading. What was the hardest lesson when you realized code alone wasn't enough anymore? Like when you started leading the team, what was your biggest learnings?
So, I mean, let's be frank. The only reason people lead is because they are ambitious and because they want to earn more, right? The earning is a big incentive to actually lead teams. But that also leads to a lot of people who are actually not necessarily super interested in leading. They're more interested in the paycheck, right? And I think leadership is not something easy. You can be a very good leader with one team and a very bad one with another. There's dynamics between people, right? To me, before I started to lead team, I had some ideas of how it should be. And this idea was formed by looking at bad leaders and thinking, in their shoes, I would do this, I would do that. So it's very critic against the bad leaders that I've met in my life. And there was many. But then when you're faced with it, there's a lot of anxiety because the ideas that you formed in your mind about what it is to lead a team, does it actually translate into results? Will you be liked? Do you need to be liked? What kind of results are you trying to achieve? So to give you an idea, the first significant team I had was in my telco experience. After a few years, they decided to give me a large team in Singapore. That team, when after 1 year of management, we have the employee engagement survey, and you have questions about the company and questions about the direct manager. And then you give a score and you get your score. It's anonymized, of course. And all the questions about the direct manager, I got scored 100%. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I was, I think, one of the only one with this score. So I was like, really, that's a way to lead people. That confirms me in my idea. But there was a side effect to that. So the way I was working with them is by being entirely transparent. I basically act as an umbrella. I take a lot of heat from the top. I protect the team from this heat, and I'm entirely transparent about what comes on me. How do I solve it? It's very trust-based, right? So that created that 100% on the direct manager question. But the side effect is that on the questions about the company vision and strategy, my team was having one of the lowest score because they were acknowledging me, but because I was so transparent, they were hating to hear about all the heat I was taking for this, for that, or whatever. Actually, personally, I was not hating it. I thought it was my job, and that's part of being a director. You're on your own. It's up to you to come with solution and to protect the people below you. So I took it as being part of the role, but by being so transparent, the team was challenging the company vision itself. So you see, it's really a delicate balance. It's a very difficult exercise where you want to be a strong leader. That comes with trust, protection, strengths also, fighting for your people. But you also need to always remind yourself that it's not the company doing something for you. It's you doing something for the company. And therefore, relying people around the company vision and strategy is nearly as important because you need to be part of a bigger group. And I think that was the biggest learning that I had. And
You
how can you
were
call yourself a successful leader? You're never a successful leader. You might be a successful leader at some point, but then new challenges come and you constantly have to react to new challenges, right? So it's your ability, again, to embrace the changes that makes you an effective leader. I wouldn't say successful, I would say effective, because success is very relative. And you have a lot of people who are successful without being effective.
Wow, that's very, very insightful. There are some leaders like yourself who were very transparent and you knew where to balance because some leaders who completely block, they say information is power. They hold the information with them, not providing anything to the team members, right? So what you rightly said, we will have to find a balance and work. That's a great learning.
But ultimately, the way you're measured as a leader or as an individual is not by what you say or what people say about you. It's about what you do. And one reason I could be this kind of strong leader and not being challenged by my bosses is because I was delivering, right? Because my actions were actually above the average. And that's all that matters to me is what is your delivery?
Yeah, finally, that's what is important to the company, right? What you are giving to them, like you just stated. So, on the same lines, I want to get into more into what is closer to your heart. That is AI in wealth management, right? That's your space right now. So, this is more like saving people's life. I mean, more than saving people's life. This is people's life savings you are dealing with. Can you throw some light on your work?
So we develop a wealth management platform, but we also have a lot of private equity activities. So a lot of things, when you start to reach complexity of investment, so complex investors like family office, try net worth individual, there's a lot of analysis that comes into play before writing a check of 1 or 5 millions or whatever is the amount. And that's where AI has maximum potential is in shortening the delay of analysis so that you can process more cases and find better outcomes, better potential outcomes. So I think that is definitely where AI has the most to provide. However, there's also the danger of hallucination, of providing financial advice, which ends up being a failure and getting sued for that, right? So it's a double-edged sword. Just to give you an example, when ChatGPT was released and when we started implement, so we had one of the first RAG system live in a platform. And we're indexing all the data from NASDAQ, from New York Stock Exchange, and other stocks. That was millions and millions of vectors in a vector database, plus multi-metadata fields for each and every vectors. When we were covering only 100 stocks, the accuracy of our response were quite good. Then we scaled to 200, still quite good. We scaled to 500, average. We scaled to 1,000, disaster. It was not scaling at all. So at that time, I read a lot of papers, and there was a very interesting paper from Bloomberg at that time, which also was trying to implement a RAG system. And they were saying it's actually a needle in a haystack problem. In that when you query the total amount of vectors that you have, of course, your accuracy is going to be a disaster. However, if you manage somehow to reduce the vector space that you query every time by clever tricks, then you will increase your accuracy. And this clever trick in the financial market is a very simple thing. It's a stock ticker name. So by asking, together with a question, the user to select the stock ticker name, you can constrain your vector space, which was millions of vectors, to only the vectors for that specific stock. And let's say you typically reduce from 2 million to 2,000 vectors. And suddenly your accuracy over 2,000 vectors is extremely high. It's all about understanding these kind of trade-offs about accuracy, having a robust data set to test your accuracy evolution for each and every iteration that you then deploy to your solution. And you can reach a place where you're quite safe, but you also bring value to your customers. And I think that's what we managed to do pretty successfully with Care as well.
Talking about the hallucination and risk part, where should, in the fintech field, where should AI help and where should it absolutely stop? No AI at all.
I think that the pace of progress is so fast versus the pace of adoption that by the time you identify a risk, by the time you identify a use case, you analyze the use case, you find the risk, especially in big companies like banks and everything, the process is so cumbersome. By the time they go through this process, the AI will have progressed so well that this risk have probably disappeared. We've seen it for hallucinations initially. We've seen it for guardrails. Things are progressing extremely, extremely quick. And I just look at the pace of innovation versus pace of adoption. To me, that's my metrics to understand the balance. I don't think we should necessarily stop AI. What we should stop is all the nonsense that is happening today around security. It's so easy to build that people build all kind of things, but it's built without security in mind, without safety in mind, or accuracy in mind. It's built just in order to produce something that is visually appealing in order to capture funding. So I think the risk is more in the incentive of building than in actually the AI hallucination and all that. People who build carefully have much lower risk than others. There's still some security issues that have no solution. So for example, prompt injection have absolutely no solution today. And even if people have rolling out prompt injection shields, they're still very, very vulnerable. Today, there's no proper solution for prompt injection. That's the main risk today. So that means that the access to data that you give an AI, the ability to perform destructive actions on data or modification actions on data should be very, very tightly controlled. And that's what I mean by building solutions which are absolutely not secure and robust. It is because ultimately you have not put the limitation in what an AI agent can do. You've not put that properly, and you're going to end up with, like this famous example of Cursor that deleted an entire production database while the guy was vibe coding. Well, you get not what you deserve. It's a bit harsh, but that's a bit what was meant to happen when it's done without guardrails.
True. Guardrails and human in the loop is very important, right? So I want to zoom out and go to the future. 10 years from now, when AI is everywhere, what will separate great professionals from average ones?
Well, I think 10 years from now, it's going to be so different, right? Today, just to give you an idea of how I work today, because I've not seen many people working like that today, but those who work like that are 10 times more productive. I don't type anymore. I don't have a keyboard anymore. I entirely dictate things. I use, I don't know if I can tell the name, Whisperflow, that is so accurate. All the dictation systems are broken. This one is just so accurate. So I'm basically, it even tracks how fast you go. 120 words per minute. That's how fast I can type with dictation. Then I put that in a vibe coding tool or in Cursor or anti-gravity. I get my implementation plan. I review my implementation plan. Bam, I click apply. It does the work for me. Then I have other AI tools that are doing code review, that are flagging potential issues. Then you merge that into a security analysis branch, and you have other tools that are doing static code analysis and everything. You can automate so much of the process and be 10 times faster at delivering features than you were just a year ago. So in 10 years, where will we be? I think AI will be team members. To me, the agents are already team members. I talk to them when I want to launch a new feature. I basically put my dictation on and I explain the feature, like I would explain to you. No bullshit, no technical terms, just the way I would talk to you. So tomorrow you're going to manage a farm of agents. You're going to manage that exactly like you manage a team today. They're going to be stronger, they're going to be wiser than they are today. On top of that, robotics will start to kick in, which means that you will have ability not only to work and impact the virtual world, but also the physical world. I think that's going to be a very, very, very strong thing. So robotics is going to, in 10 years, is going to be out of this world. Maybe probably humanoid robots. You start to see that in China, a bit in US. Will there be space for humans? I think that's the real question we should ask ourselves. The job market will be extremely different. Will professionals still exist in 10 years? There was a very interesting debate recently with someone who had this kind of progressive idea that AI will replace people, it's going to be disaster and everything. And then Harry Stebbings was saying in front of them, you're talking about AI being adopted by companies where most of their people cannot even make a point of sale device work properly. How do you want them to adopt this kind of advanced AI that you're talking about? And he's right in a way, right? The pace of adoption will drive a lot of how the society evolves. But I don't think we're still not protected from a really disruptive event like AGI that might suddenly bring interfaces, a bit like the computer, a bit like the phone, interfaces that will change the way we interact with each other and therefore the way we work. So will there be a professional in 10 years? Not sure. I'm really looking forward to see that.
That's a fantastic insight. A lot of learnings for our young professionals. We come to the last round. That's rapid fire. I will ask you 4 to 5 questions, and first thing what comes to your mind. One habit that has the biggest impact on your life.
I'm rating my days. At the end of the day, I'm saying what day was that? Was that an 8, a 9, or a 10? And by doing that, I identified what were the factors that were driving unhappiness and remove them from my life. So today, my average day is at least an 8.
Wow. By rating, you give some parameters and finally rate it.
Subjective is how do I feel today? How do I feel by my day? And if I have to put a score on it, I would put an 8 or a 9 because things are impacting you inside, right? And if you rate a 6, you're like, but why did I rate a 6? What happened today? And this happened, this happened. Oh, that influenced how I feel. Therefore, I should act on this. And after a while, you make natural improvements, actually. Identifying things is 50% of solving a problem.
A mistake that taught you more than any other success.
I think all mistakes taught me because ultimately making mistakes is natural. And all the mistakes I've done have taught me a lesson. And it's the ability to act on these lessons and not to reproduce this mistake that makes you better every day. Actually, every mistake made who I am today.
Especially in the AI platform, AI wealth platform, 3 days like you have deadlines and it's a lot of pressure. What helps you reset when things get overwhelming?
A good glass of wine. I'm French, so wine is very important. That allows me to escape, kind of. But everyone has that thing, right? It can be sport, it can be going running. For me, it's having wine with and discussing with my wife and having my cats around.
This thing we had discussed it earlier, but again, if you had to describe your leadership style in one word, what would it be?
That's strong.
That's good. One AI buzzword you would happily retire forever. You don't need this buzzword.
There's many, but I think among the worst to me, MCP, a model context protocol, is the worst thing ever.
The biggest misconception people have about AI today.
Yeah. So I forgot who said that. I cannot give credits, but during a talk, someone said it's not because you have a generative AI hammer that every problem is a nail. And people tend to think that AI can solve everything when sometimes a classic rule-based system or a traditional machine learning algorithm will work 10,000 times better than generative AI. So this is not the solution for everything.
You just mentioned AI might be your colleague in the future. So if AI were a colleague, what would you never trust it with?
I would say my money. Even if I work in the financial services, I think money
Your
and
wallet
emotions
has to be with you.
Oh yeah,
Money and
yeah.
emotions.
It has to be rule based. It cannot be a heuristic.
Yeah. So we come to the end of our session, Vincent. Vincent, I would like to add that this was a very powerful session for me. And
Thank you.
I believe audience also will feel the same way. What stood out to me today is you're not just building AI that works, you are building AI that deserves trust. Thank you for your honesty, the depth, and the perspective.
Thank you very much, Sachin.
You are watching 101 Talks with Sachin Menon, where we break in big, complex ideas into simple, grounded conversation. Thank you. See you in the next episode.